Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm slow to come to the floor because you can't compete with the Muhammad Ali commemorative special order. That is too much passion to follow. I just have little old legislative business on my mind. I'm not talking about changing the world. I'm just talking about changing our little part of the world. I don't know if you remember, Mr. Speaker, when you first got here, you had to go downstairs and sign your name so that we could use that instead of a postage stamp on every piece of mail that you send out the door. It's called the franking privilege. And I have a bill, it's H.R. 1873, that Tammy Duckworth and I introduced together to abolish that franking privilege. It's not going to take a lot to get that done. It's something that is within the complete control of us here in this institution, but it's been a challenge that's hundreds of years in the making. I put mine up down here, Mr. Speaker. This is my signature there on the front of every envelope I send out. If you want to know how to forge a check in my name, all you need to do is look at any envelope I send out the door. Back in the day, had we been here in 1817, it might have been hard to find a postage stamp. And in the name of getting congressional business done, the law of the land carried over from England was that you could sign your name on all your government documents in order to get that important government business done. You couldn't just walk down to the local grocery store and buy stamps. You had to have a mechanism for getting your constitutional responsibilities accomplished. We do that still here today. And in these cynical times, Mr. Speaker, I would tell you that I hear most often from folks that they think one of two things is going on with the franking privilege. Number one, that we're involved in some sort of incumbent protection plan, self-promotion here in this institution, self-glorification by sending your name out on the front of all the mail that goes out the door. And if not that, I hear the second criticism, which is, Rob, why do members of Congress get free mail? Free mail. The Postal Service is in dire straits. Free mail for all members of Congress. Well, it's not free mail. For every letter that goes out the door that says Rob Woodall up at the top, I get a bill. I get a bill from the United States Postal Service for what a stamp would have cost had I put it on that letter. For every piece of mail that goes out the door with Rob Woodall written up at the top, I get a bill from the Postal Service for whatever the bulk rate would have been for the large amounts of mail that I send out the door. It's not free mail for members of Congress. I want to dispel that myth. I get all the emails that I know so many of my colleagues do that say go and serve one term in Congress and get your pension for life. Nonsense, not true. I do get the emails that come in, talk about the special health care privileges that Congress has that nobody else can have access to. Come on down, join the Obamacare exchange. You can have the same health care privileges. I have all of the myths that go on out there. The myth of free mail continues still today. It's not free mail. We just don't put a stamp on it. Why don't we end this confusion once and for all? I'd like to tell you this was my brilliant idea. Small idea, but my brilliant idea, not true. We actually went down this road in the 1800s. I hold here, Mr. Speaker, you can't read it. It's an article from the New York Times, March 3rd, 1875. It says this: by a vote of 113 to 65, the House has concurred in the Senate amendment to the Postal Appropriations Bill, partially restoring the franking privilege. The precise extent of this restoration is an allowance of free transmission through the mails on a congressional frank of the congressional record, agricultural reports, and seeds, and all public documents now printed or authorized to be printed. The New York Times, as they are still known for today, goes on to editorialize just a bit. So far as our observation goes, there has never been any demand for the restoration of the franking nuisance, except on the part of congressmen. The new men especially long for a taste of the sweets of privilege. New York Times, 1875. The sweets of privilege is how they describe the signing of one's name to a constituent response, so you can tell your constituents how it is that you feel about the war in Iraq. So you can tell folks how it is that you feel about the FCC's new regulations, so that you can respond to that young Eagle Scout applicant who wants to get the Citizenship of the Nation merit badge. We knew in the 1800s that something just didn't seem right about not using stamps like everybody else did. We knew that something didn't feel quite right. For several years, we abolished the franking privilege, and then we brought it back. I don't have any problem finding stamps, Mr. Speaker, and if anybody in this institution has problems finding stamps, I have several local locations here by the Capitol. You can send a staffer down, pick up stamps in bulk. For me, I have to go, I'm in the Longworth building up on the 7th floor, so I've got to go all the way down to the basement in order to buy my stamps. It's about 7 floors away. They don't do that anywhere else in Washington, D.C. They don't do that. If you're at the IRS and you need to send out a tax form, you don't sign your name at the top of the letter. If you work over at the Department of Agriculture and you need to send out a newsletter, you don't sign your name at the top because everybody else in government uses what's called penalty mail. It's the same stamp up at the top of a corner that any business person would use, any bulk mail house would use. It's Section 3202. It's called penalty mail, and it says this: subject to the limitations imposed by Section 3204 and 3207 of this title, there may be transmitted as penalty mail official mail of officers of the government of the United States, the Smithsonian Institution, the Pan American Union, the Pan American Sanitary Bureau, the United States Employment Service, and the system of employment offices operated by it in conformity with the provisions of Section 4949C. Understand, we have a special section in the United States Code that deals with how mail gets out the door, because it's very difficult. We've only been doing it for a couple of hundred years. It requires some special attention from the United States Code, so we have a special section of the code that allows officers of the government of the United States, the Smithsonian Institute, the Pan American Union, the Pan American Sanitary Bureau, and the United States Employment Service some special dispensation so they can get mail out the door. But was that good enough for Congress? The answer is no. Congress has yet another special exception beyond the special exception, because you see here, as I highlighted in Section A, officers of the government of the United States other than members of Congress, because what we have is our special signature program. Madam Speaker, we've got big things we've got to solve in this country, big things we've got to solve. And you can't solve those big things when folks believe that you're not telling them the truth about the little things. You've got to build trust with one another. You've got to build trust with one another, not just here in this institution, but with our constituency back home. But when people see what they think is free mail going out the door, it undermines that trust. I refer now to the House manual, Mr. Speaker. Postal expenses incurred only when the frank is insufficient, such as certified, registered, insured, express, foreign mail, and stamped self-addressed envelopes related to the recovery of official items, are reimbursable. Postage may not be used in lieu of the frank. I got to Capitol Hill, Mr. Speaker, and I thought, you know what? I know what it's like not to be on Capitol Hill. I'm going to go get a bulk mail permit. They said, no, Rob, you can't get a bulk mail permit to send out mail on Capitol Hill. I said, well, most of what I do isn't bulk mail. I'll go buy stamps to send that out. They said, no, Rob, you can't buy stamps to send out mail. You have to sign your card. You have to put your signature on it. We have to have a special congressional mail privilege for you. Tammy Duckworth and I, one Republican, one Democrat, say we can do better than that. It's an election year. You know what happens in an election year? The law of the land is You can't send out mail anymore. If I have a town hall meeting that's going on next week, I couldn't send out an invitation last month to invite you to come meet your congressman. I couldn't send out a newsletter last month to tell you what we were doing with the National Defense Authorization Act. I couldn't send out a newsletter last month to tell you about an employment and job fair program that was going on, because the law of the land so recognizes this privilege as something that incumbents use to boost their election prospects that it's banned in the 90 days before any election. So I ask you, if this practice is so offensive that we ban it within 90 days before any election, why don't we just do away with it altogether? If it is so offensive that it must be banned for 180 days out of the year, why don't we do away with it for the other 180 days too? I don't need my name on the front of every letter that goes out the door. I don't need someone to protect me from the challenges of buying stamps, but I have rules in place that prevent postage from being used in lieu of the franc. I serve on the Budget Committee, Mr. Speaker. I want to balance the federal budget. We're not going to do it with this bill. I'm the lead sponsor of the fair tax. It's the most fundamental reconstruction of our tax code that has happened since the income tax came into being in the early 1900s. It's the most prominently co-sponsored piece of fundamental tax reform legislation in this body. Those are serious pieces of legislation. This is something minor. This is around the edges. But the National Taxpayers Union has seen fit to say repealing the so-called franking privilege is a simple reform to introduce pay-as-you-go budgeting. It's absolutely right. Public Citizen said Public Citizen heartily supports the Woodall-Duckworth legislation to rein in the abuse of taxpayer-funded franked mail. I want to do the big things together. I want to do the things that matter together. And when silly things like this undermine the sacred trust that we have with our constituents, they need to go. Our colleagues who served in this body in the 1870s knew it. They abolished it. But they just couldn't let it go, and they brought it back. Even the New York Times says, where was the outcry for free congressional mail? Why was it brought back yet again? I tried to get this done on my own. I want to say to my colleagues, I didn't want to waste your time in this way. I tried to go to the Chief Administrative Office and see if I could just get an exception so I didn't have to send out this mail. I tried to go through the House Administration Committee to see if there was some sort of dispensation so that you could opt out of this system. I tried to go through the Speaker's office to see if my MRA could be spent in a different way so I didn't have to perpetuate this again, practice that is apparently so hideous, it is outlawed 180 days out of the year. But I couldn't get any of those things done. Now it's come to us to pass that simple line of code. It's a bipartisan bill. Rob Woodall, Tammy Duckworth, host of other co-sponsors there. I invite you to join me to abolish the franking privilege. You're welcome to use our hashtag of Stop the Frank anytime you feel like you can move that forward. We're not going to reestablish trust overnight. But one little accountability action at the time, we can do it. Let's do this little one today. Let's show up again and do another one, and tomorrow and do another one, and the next day and do another one, and the next day and do another one, and we're going to wake up a year from now, or a month from now, or a week from now, and we're going to find out that we've really made a difference together. Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to you for the time, and if I could yield to my friend from the Rules Committee, I'd be happy to do it.